In a small, quiet town, there lived a man named Kendrick with his wife, Elena, and their 2 children. They had always managed to get by, but life was never easy for them. Kendrick worked in a factory, but the job didn't pay well, and it was a constant struggle to make ends meet. Each month, they found themselves stretching their limited resources just to buy enough food and pay the bills. Despite the financial hardships, Kendrick's family never lacked love or support from one another. They made do with what they had and kept a positive outlook, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could face anything together. Kendrick, however, often felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He worked long hours, doing his best to provide for his family, but his efforts never seemed to be enough. He would come home late, tired and worn out, only to find that the bills were piling up and the pantry was nearly empty. It pained him to see his wife and children struggle, and he couldn't help but feel guilty that he couldn't offer them a better life. Still, one thing was certain: Kendrick never complained. He had learned early on that life wasn't always fair, and sometimes you had to do your best with what you were given. Despite the challenges, Kendrick was known for something that set him apart from others in town: his honesty. No matter how difficult the situation, he always told the truth. Even when it was hard, even when it meant facing uncomfortable truths, Kendrick never lied. His integrity was something his friends and neighbors respected deeply. And even though his family didn't have much, they knew they could always count on him to do what was right. This trait, though simple, became Kendrick's foundation. It was what kept him grounded when everything around him felt uncertain. But life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at you, and Kendrick was about to face one of his toughest tests yet. His life, which had always been difficult but manageable, was about to change in a way he never anticipated. Little did he know that the loss of his job and the temptation to lie would shake his very core, testing the values he had held so dear for so long. As he sat down at the dinner table one night, the weight of the world on his shoulders, he had no idea just how much his commitment to honesty would soon be put to the ultimate test. One day, Kendrick's world came crashing down when he received the news that the factory where he worked was closing its doors. The company was downsizing, and everyone, including Kendrick, was being laid off. It was a moment that turned his already difficult life upside down. For a man who had always worked tirelessly to provide for his family, this news was devastating. He had spent years in that factory, giving his best each day. But now, all of that effort seemed to count for nothing. His first thought was for his wife, Elena, and their 2 children. How would he take care of them now? How would he pay the bills? Kendrick knew that losing his job meant more than just losing his income. It meant the potential breakdown of everything he had worked for. He had always been able to hold his head high even in the face of adversity, but now he was uncertain. The weight of responsibility seemed even heavier, and fear began to take root in his heart. How would they survive? What would he tell his family? His mind raced with questions, each one more troubling than the last. That night, as the family sat down for dinner, the air felt thick with tension. Kendrick could hardly bring himself to speak, and Elena immediately noticed the change in him. She looked at him with concern, sensing something was wrong. "What's the matter, Kendrick?" she asked softly, her eyes full of worry. Kendrick hesitated, his mind racing as he struggled to find the right words. He didn't want to add to her stress, but he couldn't keep the truth from her. Sighing deeply, he finally spoke. "I lost my job today," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Elena's face turned pale with shock, and her hands trembled as she set down the dinner plates. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, her voice filled with panic. "We have bills to pay, and the kids need food. How will we manage?" Kendrick didn't have an answer. He wished he did. He promised her that he would look for another job, but deep down, he didn't know how long that would take, or if it would even be enough. The future seemed uncertain, and all he could do was hold on to hope, knowing that he would do whatever it took to keep his family safe and cared for. But in that moment, he felt completely lost. The following day, Kendrick set out early, determined to find a new job. He walked through the town, stopping at every store, factory, and business he could think of, asking if anyone was hiring. The answer was always the same: no. Every door he knocked on seemed to close in his face. With each rejection, his hope began to fade a little more. He felt the weight of his family's future pressing down on him, and the fear of not being able to provide for them was starting to consume him. But he couldn't stop now. He had to keep going, no matter how discouraging it seemed. As Kendrick walked along the sidewalk, lost in his thoughts, something caught his eye. On the ground, just a few steps ahead of him, was a wallet. He bent down to pick it up, his heart skipping a beat. It was a thick wallet, stuffed with cash. Kendrick's first instinct was to look around. He scanned the area, searching for someone who might be looking for it. But there was no one in sight. The streets were empty, and the town was quiet. He could take the money and no one would ever know. For a moment, Kendrick stood frozen, the wallet heavy in his hands. His mind raced. He thought about Elena and the kids, about the bills that were due and the food they needed. The temptation was strong. He could use the money to pay the bills, to buy groceries, and maybe even get them through the next few weeks. It was so easy, so tempting. All he had to do was keep the wallet, and no one would be the wiser. But then something inside him stirred. He remembered the values he had always tried to live by. The importance of honesty. He had always prided himself on never lying, on doing the right thing, even when it was hard. This was different, though. He felt cornered, desperate. Maybe just this once, he could make an exception. Kendrick took the wallet home. He didn't tell Elena where the money had come from, choosing instead to say, "I found some extra work today." Elena, relieved that he had brought home the money, didn't question him. She was grateful and happy, not suspecting anything. They used the cash to buy food and pay the bills, and for a brief moment, things seemed better. But even as he watched his family eat and smile, Kendrick couldn't shake the feeling of guilt gnawing at him. He had lied, and that lie would weigh on him. A few days after Kendrick had lied about the money, things took a turn for the worse. One morning, there was a knock at the door. Kendrick opened it to find two local police officers standing on the doorstep, their faces serious. "Good morning, sir," one of them said. "We're investigating a lost wallet. A wallet full of cash was reported missing, and we were wondering if you might have found it." Kendrick's heart dropped. He could feel the panic rising in his chest. The officer's words seemed to echo in his ears, and for a moment, he couldn't even find his voice. He glanced nervously at Elena, who was standing behind him, and then back at the officers. The truth was closing in on him, and he knew he had to say something. But what could he say? If he told them the truth, the money would be taken from him, and his family would once again face the same struggles. He couldn't bear the thought of losing it. On the other hand, if he lied, he could end up in even more trouble. He felt trapped, like there was no right choice, no way to fix the mess he had created. But in that moment, fear overpowered reason. "I haven't seen any wallet," Kendrick said, his voice shaky. He told himself that it was just one more lie, just one more small deception to protect his family. The officers nodded, not pushing him further, and left without incident. Kendrick closed the door behind them, his heart still racing. The lie felt wrong, but he tried to brush it off, telling himself that it was for the best. However, the guilt he had been carrying only grew heavier. with each passing day. The lie had compounded upon itself, and Kendrick couldn't shake the feeling that he was being weighed down by something much bigger than he had ever imagined. He kept telling himself that he was doing what was necessary, but deep inside, he knew he had crossed a line. Then, just a few days later, the police returned. This time, they weren't so friendly. "We have evidence," one officer said, his tone firm. "Someone saw you pick up the wallet. Why did you lie to us?" Kendrick's blood ran cold. He couldn't escape the truth anymore. His stomach twisted in knots as he realized there was no way out. With a heavy heart, Kendrick admitted what he had done. "I did find the wallet," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I took the money. I was desperate. I'm sorry." The officer shook his head, disappointment in his eyes. "Lying made this worse," he said sternly. "You'll have to return the money, and you may face charges." Kendrick felt a deep shame wash over him. His lie had not only put his family at risk, but had also made everything worse. What had started as a desperate attempt to protect them had led to an even bigger mess. The guilt that had been eating at him now felt unbearable, and he knew he would have to face the consequences of his actions. Kendrick felt his heart sink as he prepared to tell Elena the truth. The weight of his lies was overwhelming, and he knew that the consequences would be far worse than if he had just been honest from the start. The guilt had gnawed at him for days, and he could no longer keep the secret from his family. He had already seen how much the situation had shaken him, but now it was time to face the music. That evening, after the police had left, Kendrick sat down with Elena. The look on his face was enough to make her nervous. She could tell something was wrong, but she had no idea just how bad things were. Kendrick took a deep breath, and with a heavy heart finally spoke. "I have to tell you something," he began, his voice shaking. "I didn't tell you the truth about the money." Elena looked at him, confusion and concern on her face. "What do you mean? What money?" she asked. Not understanding where this was going. "I found a wallet on the street," Kendrick explained, "and it had a lot of money in it. I kept it and didn't tell you the truth about where it came from. I lied to you. I thought I could protect you and the kids by keeping it, but I was wrong. I made everything worse." Elena's expression changed in an instant. Her eyes widened, and her lips trembled as she processed what Kendrick was saying. The hurt was evident in her voice as she spoke. "How could you lie to us, Kendrick? How could you keep that from me? We've always trusted each other." Kendrick hung his head, ashamed. "I was scared, Elena. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I kept the money, we'd be okay. But now I see that I only made things worse." Elena stood silent for a moment, her emotions swirling. She was hurt, but there was something else in her eyes too understanding. "I get that you were scared," she finally said, her voice softer now. "But lying about it only made everything harder. We need to rebuild the trust we had. It's going to take time, Kendrick." Kendrick felt the weight of her words, and he knew she was right. The damage was done. He had broken the trust they had worked so hard to build, and now it would take time and effort to rebuild it. He could see the pain in Elena's eyes, and it hurt him more than anything else. "I'm sorry," Kendrick said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Although Elena forgave him, the damage was far from over. Their children didn't fully understand what was going on, but they could see the sadness in their parents' faces. Kendrick had always taught them the value of honesty, but now they saw him as a man who had broken that rule. The road ahead was uncertain, but Kendrick knew that rebuilding his family's trust would be his most important task moving forward. Kendrick's confession was only the beginning of the consequences he would face. The next chapter of his ordeal unfolded in a courtroom where he stood before a judge, fully aware that his actions had led him here. The courtroom was filled with tension, and Kendrick's nerves were on edge. He had already apologized to his family, but now he had to confront the legal consequences of his lies. He had hope that his remorse would somehow lessen the punishment, but deep down, he knew there was no escaping the reality of what he had done. As Kendrick stood before the judge, he felt the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him even more. The judge, stern and unyielding, looked at Kendrick with a mixture of disappointment and seriousness. "You lied to the police," the judge said, his voice firm. "You had the chance to do the right thing, but instead you chose to deceive. You could have returned the wallet, but you didn't. That decision has consequences." Kendrick lowered his gaze, feeling the sting of the judge's words. He knew he deserved to be punished, and yet hearing it from someone else made it even more painful. The judge continued, outlining the consequences of Kendrick's actions. "Lying to the police is a serious offense. Your decision to keep the money and lie about it has made things more complicated. You've damaged the trust in your community, and you've shown that you were willing to take a shortcut rather than face the truth. For this, you will face a fine, and you'll also serve time in jail." Kendrick's stomach turned as the judge's words sank in. A fine he could handle, but jail time felt like a cruel reminder of just how far he had fallen. He thought back to the days when he had prided himself on being an honest man. And now, here he was paying for his mistakes in ways he never could have imagined. After the trial, Kendrick was taken to jail. The time he spent behind bars was difficult, but it also gave him time to reflect on everything he had lost. He thought about Elena, their children, and the life they had built together. The guilt was unbearable. While he was locked away, his family struggled even more. Elena had to pick up extra work, and their children missed their father. The family's life had been turned upside down because of one moment of weakness and a lie that spiraled out of control. When Kendrick was finally released from jail, he felt like a different man. He had learned a painful lesson, one that he would never forget. He looked at his family with regret, but also with determination. He had hurt them, but he was ready to make things right. The road ahead would be hard, but he was committed to doing whatever it took to rebuild their lives and, most importantly, to regain their trust. Years passed, and Kendrick slowly began to rebuild his life and his relationship with his family. The scars of his mistakes were still there, but with time, the healing process had begun. He had learned the hard way that honesty was more than just a value. It was the foundation of trust and the only way to live with integrity. His family, too, had begun to heal, though it wasn't without effort. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, and Kendrick was determined to prove that he was worthy of that trust again. He found a new job and worked hard every day to provide for his family. It wasn't easy, but this time Kendrick approached his work and his life with a renewed sense of purpose. He had learned to face challenges head-on without resorting to shortcuts or lies. The lesson was clear. Honesty might be difficult at times, but it was always the right path. And now, more than ever, he understood that his actions had consequences not just for him, but for everyone around him. One afternoon, Kendrick's son came home from school looking troubled. His eyes were downcast, and he seemed to be carrying a heavy weight on his shoulders. "Dad," he said quietly, "I broke a window at school. I'm scared to tell the teacher. What should I do?" Kendrick smiled gently and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I understand you're scared," he said, "but hiding the truth will only make things worse. It's always better to face the truth, even when it's hard. Go and tell the teacher. You'll feel better once you do, and you won't have to carry that fear around with you." His son nodded, taking in his father's words, and left to face the situation. Kendrick watched him go, a feeling of pride swelling in his chest. It wasn't easy to teach lessons like these, but Kendrick knew that he was doing the right thing. His son had learned from his mistakes, and Kendrick was determined to lead by example, showing him that honesty was the key to living a life of integrity, no matter how difficult it might seem. Looking back on his own journey, Kendrick realized that the mistakes he had made had shaped him into a better man. He had learned that lies only lead to more lies, and the consequences of those lies are often far greater than we can imagine. But through the pain and the struggles, Kendrick had found redemption and the truth. His story wasn't just his own. It was a lesson for anyone who had ever been tempted to take the easy way out. The road to redemption is never quick, and it's never without cost, but it is always worth it. Just like Kendrick, we all have the chance to learn from our mistakes, to face the truth, and to rebuild what was broken. And in the end, honesty isn't just about telling the truth. It's about living in a way that honors trust, love, and integrity, no matter what life throws at us.